Ranger's claws tore into the wooden floor with desperate fury. The German shepherd's bark echoed through the ancient trees of Arrow Creek National Forest, sharp and relentless, each sound a warning that something terrible lay hidden beneath. Sheriff Owen Clark dropped to his knees beside the dog, his weathered hands trembling as they brushed away dirt and moss. The tiny house loomed above them like a crooked mushroom, its moss-covered dome barely reaching his chest. Wrong. Everything about this place felt wrong. Then he heard a faint mechanical hum vibrating through the floorboards. Owen pressed his ear to the wood. His blood ran cold. "There's something underneath," he whispered. Marcus Webb pulled back the rotting planks. A metal hatch gleamed in the moonlight, frost coating its edges. Despite the autumn warmth above, Ranger whimpered once, then barked again. Somewhere below, in the darkness, a child was running out of time. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Owen Clark had worn his badge for 30 years, and every single one of those years had carved deeper lines into his face. At 58, he walked through his empty house each morning, past photographs of Margaret smiling back at him from frames that collected more dust each month. Cancer had taken her 3 years ago, but her last words still echoed in his mind during sleepless nights. "Promise me, you won't give up on those children. Owen, they need you." He had failed her once. 15 years ago, a boy named Tommy Sullivan vanished from Arrow Creek, and Owen never found him. The case went cold. The parents moved away, broken. Owen carried that failure like a stone in his chest, heavier with each passing year. Now, on the edge of retirement, he wondered if he would ever find redemption. Ranger had his own scars, though he could not speak of them. The German shepherd bore a jagged mark on his right ear, a wound that made him flinch whenever strangers raised their hands too quickly. Marcus Webb had found him at a rescue shelter 4 years ago, abandoned and fearful, but possessing an intelligence that blazed behind those amber eyes. No one knew who had hurt him or why someone would discard such a magnificent animal. Marcus, 35, and devoted to his canine partner, trusted Ranger with absolute faith. He had watched the dog track missing hikers through impossible terrain, locate evidence buried under feet of snow, and alert on suspects with uncanny precision. 220 million scent receptors worked behind that black nose, and Marcus believed those receptors could find anyone, anywhere. "He never quits," Marcus often said. "That dog has more loyalty in one paw than most humans have in their whole bodies." The Parker family lived in a modest house on Maple Street, where financial troubles had recently darkened their door. David Parker, 42, had lost his engineering job 2 months prior. Sarah, his wife, worked double shifts as a nurse to keep them afloat. Their daughter Lily, 10 years old with golden hair and a passion for painting, brought light into their struggling home. Young Ethan, only 6, followed his sister everywhere, worshiping her like only little brothers can. That morning had begun like any other. Lily ate breakfast with her family, promised to come straight home after her piano lesson, and pedaled away on her bicycle. The bell Owen had given her for her birthday chimed cheerfully as she disappeared down the tree-lined street. She never came home. By evening, David found her bicycle abandoned near the forest trail. The bell still hung from the handlebars, silent now. No signs of struggle marked the scene, just an empty and a father's rising terror. When Owen received the call, He set down his coffee with shaking hands. Not again. He could not fail again. The bicycle lay on its side near the forest trail, its front wheels still spinning lazily in the late afternoon breeze. David Parker spotted it first, and his heart stopped beating for 3 terrible seconds. He knew that bicycle. He had taught Lily to ride it in their backyard, holding the seat while she wobbled and laughed. Now it rested in the dirt like a fallen soldier, and his daughter was nowhere to be seen. He ran to it, calling her name. His voice echoed through the ancient trees of Arrow Creek, but only birds answered. The pink streamers on the handlebars fluttered weakly. The bell Owen had given her for her birthday hung silent, its cheerful ring now a ghost of happier times. David searched the immediate area, his breath coming faster with each passing second. No signs of struggle marked the ground, no torn clothing caught on branches, no footprints led away from the scene. Just an abandoned bicycle and a father's worst nightmare materializing before his eyes. He noticed the dirt on the pedals, red clay. The distinctive soil found only in the deeper parts of the forest. Lily had been heading toward home. She had been so close to safety. What could have made her stop? What could have drawn her away from the familiar path? David pulled out his phone with trembling fingers and called Sarah. Her scream through the receiver would haunt him for years to come. By 5:15, the Arrow Creek Police Department received the call. Owen Clark stood in his kitchen, staring at a photograph of Margaret on the wall, when his radio crackled to life. Missing child, 10 years old, last seen on Cedar Trail near Arrow Creek National Forest. His coffee cup nearly slipped from his grasp. Tommy Sullivan's face flashed through his mind, the freckled boy with the gap-toothed smile who had vanished 15 years ago. Owen had searched for weeks, following every lead, interviewing every suspect, nothing. The case remained unsolved, a permanent stain on his career and his conscience. The boy's parents had looked at him with such hope, and he had crushed that hope with his failure. "Not again," Owen muttered, grabbing his jacket. "Not on my watch." He arrived at the Parker residence within minutes. Sarah sat on the porch steps, clutching a pink jacket, Lily's favorite. Her hands shook so violently that the fabric rippled like water. David paced the lawn, phone pressed to his ear, calling everyone they knew. Young Ethan stood in the doorway, silent and pale, hugging a stuffed bear that belonged to his sister. Owen knelt beside Sarah. "We're going to find her, ma'am." "I promise you," but even as he spoke those words, doubt gnawed at his stomach. He had made similar promises before. By 5:30, the Amber Alert blazed across every phone in Washington state. Lily Parker's school photo, bright smile, golden hair, missing front tooth appeared on screens throughout the region. Social media erupted with shares and prayers. The community of Arrow Creek, normally quiet and close-knit, mobilized with desperate energy. Yet Owen noticed the whispers. Some neighbors glanced at David with suspicious eyes. The man had lost his job recently. Money troubles plagued the family. Stress could make people do terrible things. Owen hated these whispers, but he could not silence them. They were part of every investigation, the ugly speculation that accompanied tragedy. At 6 o'clock sharp, Marcus Webb arrived with Ranger. The German Shepherd leaped from the patrol vehicle, all muscle and focus, his amber eyes scanning the environment with predatory intensity. Marcus carried Lily's pink jacket to the dog, holding it carefully so the scent remained pure. Ranger pressed his nose deep into the fabric, inhaling with powerful concentration. His entire body transformed in that moment, ears pointed forward, tail straightened into a rigid line, every muscle tensed with purpose. He had captured the scent, locked it into his remarkable memory, and now nothing would deter him from following it. "He's got it," Marcus said with quiet confidence. "Trust the process. Sheriff?" Owen studied the dog, wanting desperately to believe. Ranger was exceptional. Everyone in the department knew that. But the forest was vast. Darkness was falling, and a child's life hung in the balance. Could he really trust everything to this animal? The search team assembled quickly despite budget constraints. 12 officers, 3 civilian volunteers, and 1 K-9 unit. Not enough. Owen thought bitterly. Years of funding cuts had stripped the department to its bones. They lacked thermal imaging equipment, sufficient radios, and manpower. They would have to rely on skill, determination, and Ranger's nose. The dog pulled at his lead, straining toward the forest. Marcus gave him slack, and Ranger surged forward, nose sweeping the ground in wide arcs. The team followed, flashlights cutting through the gathering dusk. Autumn fog began rising from the forest floor, curling around tree trunks like ghostly fingers. Owen's back ached within the first hour, old injuries from decades of service making themselves known. But he pushed forward, refusing to show weakness. Every second mattered. Every step could bring them closer to Lily. Ranger moved with relentless purpose, never hesitating, never second-guessing. His paws churned through fallen leaves and over gnarled roots. Marcus jogged behind him, reading the dog's body language with expert precision. "He's confident," Marcus reported. "She came this way." The forest grew denser as they pushed deeper into Arrow Creek. Shadows lengthened and merged until the trees became dark sentinels watching their passage. Owl calls pierced the silence. Small animals rustled through undergrowth, disturbed by the intrusion. Owen checked his watch. 3 hours of daylight remained, perhaps less with the cloud cover moving in. He thought of Lily, somewhere in this wilderness, alone and frightened, or worse, not alone at all. "We keep going," he commanded. "We don't stop until we find her." Yet Ranger barked once, as if agreeing, and plunged deeper into the darkness ahead. 3 hours into the forest, and Ranger had not paused for a single moment. The German shepherd moved like a machine built for one purpose, his nose sweeping inches above the ground, inhaling the invisible trail that only he could perceive. Marcus had offered him water twice, but Ranger ignored the bowl, too focused on his mission to acknowledge basic needs. His 220 million scent receptors worked overtime, processing information that human technology could never replicate. Owen followed behind, his flashlight beam dancing across the forest floor. His lower back screamed with each step, decades of wear making themselves brutally known. But he refused to slow down, refused to show the younger officers that age had weakened him. Every second counted. Every moment they delayed could mean the difference between finding Lily alive or finding her too late. The forest had transformed into something primordial as darkness fully descended. Ancient Douglas firs towered overhead, their branches blocking out the stars and creating a canopy so thick that moonlight barely penetrated. Fog continued rising from the damp earth, swirling around their ankles like something alive. The sounds of civilization had vanished completely, replaced by the calls of owls, the rustling of unseen creatures, and the constant whisper of wind through pine needles. Some team members began showing signs of exhaustion. Deputy Harris stumbled over a root, catching himself against a tree trunk. Officer Martinez kept checking his watch, his expression growing more doubtful with each glance. Even the civilian volunteers, who had started with such determination, now moved with heavy feet and sagging shoulders. "Sheriff," Deputy Harris called out, "maybe we should reassess. The dog's been running us in circles for hours." Owen spun around, his eyes hard. "Does that look like circles to you?" That dog hasn't hesitated once. We keep moving." But doubt crept into his own mind, whispering terrible possibilities. What if Ranger was wrong? What if they were wasting precious time while Lily waited somewhere else entirely? The weight of responsibility pressed down on Owen's shoulders like a physical burden. Miles away, in the small chapel on Main Street, Sarah Parker knelt before the altar. Candles flickered around her, casting dancing shadows on the wooden pews. Her hands clutched a silver necklace, a locket containing Lily's photograph so tightly that her fingernails dug crescents into her palms. Blood welled in the tiny wounds, but she did not notice. Physical pain meant nothing compared to the agony tearing through her heart. She whispered prayers between sobs, bargaining with God for her daughter's safe return. "Please, Lord, take anything from me. Take everything. Just bring her back." The chapel door opened, and Mrs. Henderson from next door entered quietly. She placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, offering wordless comfort. Other neighbors filtered in throughout the evening, forming a vigil of shared hope and fear. They lit candles, recited prayers, and held each other in the flickering light. "God helps those who help themselves," Sarah finally said, wiping her eyes. "We cannot just sit here." She stood, determination replacing despair in her expression. Within the hour, she had organized a group to print flyers. Lily's face multiplied across hundreds of sheets of paper, each one a desperate plea to the community. Missing, 10 years old, last seen near Arrow Creek Forest. Please help. David walked through downtown Arrow Creek, stapling flyers to telephone poles and taping them in store windows. His hand shook with each movement, but he forced himself to continue. Motion kept the panic at bay. Action prevented him from collapsing under the weight of terror. He noticed the stares. Whispered conversations stopped when he approached. Some people offered sympathetic smiles, but others looked at him with something darker in their eyes. Suspicion, judgment. He knew what they were thinking. The father lost his job. The family has money problems. Desperate people do desperate things. David wanted to scream at them, to grab them by their collars and shake them until they understood his innocence. But he swallowed his rage and continued distributing flyers. Proving himself innocent mattered less than finding his daughter. Back at the Parker home, young Ethan sat in Lily's bedroom, surrounded by her drawings and books. He held her stuffed bear against his chest, breathing in the scent of his sister. His small body trembled, but no tears fell. The 6-year-old had retreated into silence, his voice stolen by shock. The dining table that evening held 3 place settings instead of 4. No one ate. The empty chair screamed louder than any words could. At 10 o'clock, Owen's radio crackled with the voice of Captain Rodriguez. "Sheriff Clark, we need to discuss resource allocation. The KT-9 unit has been deployed for over 4 hours with no results. Budget constraints require us to consider alternative approaches." Owen stopped walking, his jaw tightening. "Alternative approaches? What alternatives? We have a missing child, Captain. I understand the urgency, but we're burning through overtime budget. Perhaps we should call in state resources, set up a proper command center, work systematically rather than chasing a dog through the wilderness." Marcus overheard the conversation and stepped closer, his expression fierce. "That dog knows what he's doing, Captain. I stake my career on it. Your career isn't what concerns me right now, Officer Webb. It's the life of that little girl." Owen stood frozen between duty and instinct. Following orders had defined his career. Respecting the chain of command had kept the department running smoothly. But Margaret's voice echoed in his memory words she had spoken during one of their late-night conversations. "Trust your instincts, Owen, not the rule book. Your gut has never failed you." He keyed his radio. "Captain, give me 2 more hours. If Ranger doesn't find something concrete by midnight, I'll personally call in state support. This is my responsibility, my decision." A long pause filled the airwaves. Finally, Rodriguez responded, 2 hours. Sheriff, not a minute more." Owen clipped the radio back to his belt and turned to face his team. Exhausted faces stared back at him, waiting for direction. He straightened his spine despite the pain radiating through his lower back. "We continue," he announced. "That dog hasn't failed yet, and I'll be damned if I'm the one who gives up first." As if responding to Owen's declaration, Ranger suddenly lifted his head from the ground. His ears rotated like satellite dishes, catching something the humans could not hear. Then, without warning, he changed direction completely. Veering sharply toward the northeast, his pace increased, pulling Marcus along with renewed urgency. "Something's changed," Marcus called out. "He's got something stronger now." Yeah, Owen took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the cold forest air. His back ached, his legs burned, his heart hammered with fear and hope in equal measure. He followed the dog into the deeper darkness, praying that Margaret's faith in instinct would prove justified. Ranger stopped so abruptly that Marcus nearly tripped over him. The German shepherd stood rigid in the middle of a dense thicket, his muscular body trembling with an emotion that looked disturbingly like fear. His ears, normally pointed forward with confidence, now lay flat against his skull. A low whimper escaped his throat, a sound Marcus had never heard from his partner before. "What's wrong?" But Marcus knelt beside the dog, concern creasing his forehead. Owen caught up, breathing heavily from the relentless pace. He immediately noticed the change in Ranger's demeanor. The dog who had charged through the forest with unwavering determination now seemed hesitant, almost reluctant. Yet, even as his body language screamed discomfort, Ranger took another step forward, then another. His loyalty to the mission overcame whatever primal fear gripped him. The scar on Ranger's right ear seemed to pulse in the moonlight. Owen had noticed that mark before, but never asked about its origin. Now, watching the dog's conflicted behavior, he wondered what terrible memory that scar represented. "Something's wrong with him," Marcus whispered. "But he won't stop. It's like he recognizes something here." Ranger pushed through the final barrier of branches, and the team followed him into a small clearing. What they found there made every person freeze in their tracks. The structure stood in the center of the clearing like something from a dark fairy tale. It resembled a giant mushroom that had been knocked sideways by a tremendous force, its dome-shaped roof tilting at an unnatural angle. Green moss covered every surface so thickly that the building seemed to have grown from the forest floor rather than been constructed by human hands. Lichen in shades of gray and pale yellow clung to the wood, adding to its otherworldly appearance. A round door, no larger than a hobbit hole, faced them. The opening was so small that a grown adult would need to crawl on hands and knees to enter. The entire structure stood less than a meter tall at its highest point, making it appear designed for children, or perhaps woodland creatures from folklore. Yet there was nothing whimsical about this place. The wrongness of it radiated outward like heat from a fire. Owen stepped closer, his flashlight beam revealing more disturbing details. The wood appeared ancient, riddled with termite tracks and weathered by countless seasons. But someone had reinforced the structure with metal brackets and steel plates, modern additions that contrasted sharply with the decaying timber. This was no abandoned playhouse. Someone maintained this place. Someone visited regularly. The chemical smell hit him next. Beneath the expected odors of damp earth and rotting vegetation lurked something artificial, something that did not belong in a forest. It reminded Owen of hospitals, of laboratories, of places where sterile meets sinister. Deputy Harris circled the structure, his flashlight revealing more oddities. "Sheriff, look at this." Around the base of the mushroom house, stones had been arranged in perfect circles, not random rocks scattered by nature, but deliberately placed stones forming concentric rings. Symbols that Owen could not identify had been scratched into some of the larger rocks. The arrangement spoke of ritual, of obsession, of a disturbed mind at work. "What in God's name is this?" Owen muttered. "This ain't right. None of this is right." Ranger began barking with explosive intensity. The sound shattered the eerie silence of the clearing, echoing off the surrounding trees and returning as ghostly repetitions. His bark carried desperation and certainty in equal measure, the unmistakable signal that every Kate handler recognized immediately. Marcus grabbed Owen's arm. "That's his alert. Someone's here. He's positive." The German shepherd did not just bark. He attacked the wooden floor of the structure with his claws, raking deep gouges into the moss-covered planks. His paws churned with frantic energy, sending splinters and vegetation flying. He circled once, twice, 3 times, then returned to the same spot, digging with renewed fury. "He's trying to tell us something's underneath," Marcus said, his voice tight with urgency. Owen approached the structure cautiously, his hand resting on his service weapon. Every instinct screamed danger, but Lily could be inside. He could not let fear paralyze him, not when a child's life hung in the balance. He knelt beside Ranger, placing his hand on the vibrating floorboards. The dog paused momentarily, looking at Owen with those intelligent amber eyes. Understanding passed between man and beast. "Trust me," those eyes seemed to say. "I know what I found." Owen pressed his ear against the cold wood, ignoring the dampness that seeped into his uniform. At first, he heard only the thundering of his own heartbeat. Then, gradually, Another sound emerged from below, a mechanical humming, steady and rhythmic, pulsed through the floorboards like the heartbeat of some buried machine. The vibrations traveled through the wood and into his skull, alien and wrong. "There's machinery running down there," Owen announced, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something electrical, something big." The team exchanged worried glances. This was no ordinary missing child case. They had stumbled into something far more sinister than a simple abduction. "Get these boards up," Owen commanded. "Now." 3 officers produced pry bars and began working on the floorboards. The nails screamed as they pulled free from ancient wood. Ranger continued barking, encouraging their efforts with his relentless voice. Moss and dirt fell away as the planks lifted, revealing what lay beneath. A metal hatch gleamed in the combined light of multiple flashlights. Modern, industrial, completely out of place in this forest setting. Frost coated its edges despite the relatively mild autumn temperature above ground. Cold air seeped through the seal around the hatch, carrying that chemical smell more strongly now, mixed with something organic and unsettling. An electronic keypad was mounted on the hatch, its small screen glowing with faint blue light. Whoever had built this underground facility had spared no expense on security. This was not the work of a casual criminal. This represented years of planning, significant resources, and terrifying dedication. Owen touched the metal surface and immediately withdrew his hand. Ice cold. Whatever existed below was refrigerated, maintained at temperatures far below the natural underground environment. "Someone built this over many years," Owen said, the realization dawning with horrible clarity. "This is calculated, methodical, professional." Marcus stared at the hatch, his face pale. "Sheriff, what are we dealing with here?" Owen did not answer immediately. His mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last, but one thought dominated all others. Lily was down there. He knew it with absolute certainty. Ranger knew it too, which was why the dog continued his frantic barking despite his obvious fear. "We're going in," Owen declared. "Call for backup and get a technical team here immediately. But we're not waiting. That child has been missing for over 6 hours." He reached for the hatch handle, pausing for just a moment. Whatever waited below would change everything. He could feel it in his bones, the same instinct that Margaret had always told him to trust. Ranger barked once more, sharp and insistent. Owen pulled the handle. The hatch opened with a pneumatic hiss that sent a cloud of frigid air rushing upward. Owen recoiled from the cold, his breath forming thick clouds in front of his face. Below, a metal ladder descended into darkness, its rungs disappearing into shadow after only a few feet. The mechanical humming grew louder now that the seal had been broken. A constant drone that vibrated through the metal structure. Owen grabbed his flashlight and began the descent. His boots clanged against each rung, the sound echoing downward into the unknown depths. Marcus followed close behind, leaving Ranger above with Deputy Harris. The dog's barking continued, muffled now but no less urgent. The ladder extended farther than Owen had anticipated. 10 feet, 15, 20. Finally, his boots touched solid ground. He swept his flashlight across the space and felt his stomach lurch with shock. The underground chamber was enormous, far larger than the tiny mushroom house above could have suggested. It stretched at least 50 feet in length and 30 feet in width, with ceilings high enough for a man to stand comfortably. This was not a crude bunker dug by an amateur. Concrete walls, reinforced with steel beams, formed a professional construction that must have taken years to complete. Whoever had built this place possessed both resources and patience in terrifying quantities. Blue fluorescent lights flickered along the ceiling, casting an unnatural pallor over everything below. The temperature hovered near freezing, explaining the frost Owen had noticed on the hatch above. Medical equipment lined the walls, machinery that belonged in hospitals rather than forest bunkers. Monitors displayed vital signs, though Owen could not yet see whose vitals they measured. Tubes and wires snaked across the floor like sleeping serpents. Cabinets filled with bottles and instruments stood in orderly rows. But the walls themselves made Owen's blood run cold. Photographs covered nearly every surface. Dozens of them, perhaps hundreds. All children, all smiling innocently at the camera, unaware that their images would end up in this house of horrors. Owen recognized some faces from missing person reports that had crossed his desk over the past 15 years. Others were strangers, but all were children, and all had vanished without trace. Small glass display cases lined one wall, each containing personal items: a pink hair ribbon, a toy soldier, a child's shoe, a baseball glove. These were trophies, Owen realized with sickening clarity. Souvenirs collected from victims over years of predation. One item caught his attention immediately. A red toy truck, rusted with age but still recognizable. Owen had seen that truck before. It had belonged to Tommy Sullivan, the boy who had disappeared 15 years ago. The boy Owen had failed to find, the ghost that had haunted his dreams and shattered his confidence. Dear God, Marcus whispered beside him. What is this place? Owen could not answer. Words failed him in the face of such calculated evil. They moved deeper into the chamber, their footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. The humming grew louder as they approached the far end of the room. There, 3 large glass enclosures stood like vertical coffins. Each was approximately 7 feet tall and 3 feet wide, made of thick, tempered glass that reflected the blue light eerily. Tubes and wires connected to each chamber, running to a central control panel that blinked with countless lights and switches. Owen approached the first chamber and stopped dead in his tracks. Lily Parker lay inside, her small body suspended in some sort of harness. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful, as if sleeping, but her chest rose and fell with shallow, labored breaths that spoke of oxygen deprivation. Her skin had taken on a bluish tinge that sent panic coursing through Owen's veins. A digital monitor mounted on the chamber displayed critical information in harsh red numbers. Oxygen saturation, 82%, minutes remaining. 12 minutes. Lily had 12 minutes before the oxygen in her sealed chamber dropped to fatal levels. Owen slammed his fist against the glass. Lily, can you hear me? The glass did not crack, did not even vibrate. It was too thick, too well constructed. He struck it again and again, his knuckles splitting and bleeding against the unyielding surface. Marcus grabbed his radio. This is Officer Webb. We need technical support immediately. Underground facility in Arrow Creek Forest. Child in sealed chamber with limited oxygen. 12 minutes remaining. I repeat, 12 minutes Send everyone you have. Owen searched frantically for a release mechanism. The control panel stretched before him, covered in buttons and switches, labeled with abbreviations he did not understand. Pressing the wrong one could accelerate Lily's death rather than prevent it. He was a cop, not a technician. These systems were beyond his expertise. Ranger's barking suddenly grew louder. The dog had somehow descended the ladder and now stood beside Owen, whimpering and scratching at the glass chamber. His claws left white marks on the surface, but like Owen's fists, they could not penetrate. The German shepherd looked up at his human partners with desperate eyes, as if begging them to save the child he had worked so hard to find. 11 minutes, Marcus announced, his voice strained with fear. Owen forced himself to think clearly despite the panic threatening to overwhelm him. He turned his attention to the other two chambers, hoping to find some clue about the release mechanism. What he saw there stopped his heart. The second chamber held another child, older than Lily. A boy, perhaps 15 or 16 years old based on his size, though his face retained a youthful quality that suggested his aging had somehow been suspended. Owen stared at those features, recognition slowly dawning through the fog of shock. Freckles across the nose, auburn hair, a small scar above the left eyebrow from a bicycle accident. Tommy Sullivan, the boy who had vanished 15 years ago. The case that had broken Owen's spirit. The child he had searched for, mourned for, blamed himself for losing. Tommy was alive. Owen pressed his hand against the glass, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I found you," he whispered, "after all these years. I found you." The third chamber held a girl, perhaps 12 or 13. Owen recognized her from another cold case. Emily Carter disappeared 10 years prior. Her family had moved away after 3 years of fruitless searching. 3 children, 3 families destroyed, 3 cases that had haunted this community for over a decade. All here, alive, preserved in these glass prisons by a madman with unfathomable intentions. Margaret's voice echoed in Owen's memory. "Promise me you won't give up on those children." He had kept his promise. 15 years late, but he had kept it. But the victory tasted bitter as the monitor continued its countdown. 10 minutes remaining. Lily was still dying. The technical team arrived in what felt like hours, but was actually only 4 minutes. 2 specialists descended the ladder with equipment bags, their faces turning pale as they took in the underground chamber. Owen grabbed the lead technician, a young woman named Rodriguez, and pulled her toward Lily's chamber. 8 minutes, he said, pointing at the monitor. "She has 8 minutes of oxygen left. Get her out." Rodriguez studied the control panel with rapid professionalism, her trained eyes scanning the complex array of switches and displays. Her partner, a man named Foster, began tracing the wires that connected the panel to each chamber. "This is sophisticated," Rodriguez muttered. "Whoever built this knew exactly what they were doing. One wrong input could seal the chambers permanently or cut oxygen entirely." Owen's hands clenched into fists. "Then figure it out. Now." 7 minutes. Rodriguez pulled out a laptop and began connecting it to a port on the control panel. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, attempting to bypass the security protocols. Foster continued examining the physical connections, looking for a manual override. Ranger paced beside Lily's chamber, his whimpers growing more desperate. The German shepherd seemed to understand the urgency. his intelligent eyes moving between the child and the technicians. His claws clicked against the concrete floor in an anxious rhythm. 6 minutes. "I'm in the system," Rodriguez announced, "but there are multiple fail-safes. If I trigger the wrong one—" "Just do it," Owen commanded. "Whatever it takes." Marcus stood beside Owen, his hand resting on Ranger's back to calm the agitated dog. Both men watched helplessly as the technicians worked, their expertise useless in this situation. Police training did not cover underground bunkers with elaborate life support systems. 5 minutes! Sweat beaded on Rodriguez's forehead despite the freezing temperature. Her fingers never stopped moving across the keyboard. Foster found what looked like a manual release mechanism, but it was locked behind a steel plate that required a specific key. "I need more time," Rodriguez said through gritted teeth. "She doesn't have more time," Owen replied. 4 minutes? Lily's breathing had become visibly shallower. Her small chest barely rose with each intake. The blue tinge on her skin deepened, spreading from her lips to her cheeks. She looked like a porcelain doll, fragile and fading. Owen faced an impossible choice. He could attempt to break the glass with the tools they had brought, but the impact might shatter it inward, injuring Lily with shards. Or the force might trigger the failsafe Rodriguez mentioned, sealing the chamber forever. He could wait for the technician to crack the code. But what if she ran out of time? 3 minutes. Margaret's voice whispered in his memory, "Trust your instincts, not the rule book." But which instinct should he trust, the one screaming at him to smash the glass, or the one telling him to let the expert work? Rodriguez suddenly shouted, "I've got the sequence, but I need 30 more seconds to implement it." 30 seconds. Lily might not have 30 seconds. 2 minutes. Foster grabbed a crowbar and positioned himself at the steel plate. "On my count, I'll try to force this open while you input the sequence." Rodriguez nodded, her concentration absolute. 3, 2, tsh. Foster wrenched at the plate while Rodriguez's fingers danced across keys. Metal groaned. The computer beeped rapidly. 1 minute. Owen stopped breathing. Ranger stopped pacing. The entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. 47 seconds. The chamber hissed. The glass door swung open. Fresh air rushed into the chamber as Lily's prison finally released her. Owen lunged forward, catching the girl as she slumped out of the harness. Her body felt cold in his arms. Too cold, but she was breathing. Shallow, desperate breaths, but breathing nonetheless. Lily's eyes fluttered open, confused, frightened eyes that gradually focused on Owen's face. Then tears spilled down her pale cheeks. "I want to go home," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Owen held her tighter. "You're going home, sweetheart? I promise." Ranger bounded forward, his fear temporarily forgotten in the joy of success. He licked Lily's limp hand with gentle affection, his tail wagging for the first time in hours. The child he had tracked through miles of forest was safe. His mission was complete. Marcus immediately began working on the other 2 jammers, applying what Rodriguez had learned to free Tommy and Emily. Owen cradled Lily, radio on for emergency medical services to meet them above ground. Then he heard it, the sound of a vehicle approaching through the forest. Everyone froze. Whoever had built this bunker was returning. Owen handed Lily to Foster. "Get these children to safety. Everyone out except Marcus and me." Rodriguez started to protest, but Owen's expression silenced her. She gathered the children, guiding them toward the ladder with Foster's help. Tommy and Emily moved in confused dazedness, their minds struggling to comprehend their rescue after years of captivity. Owen and Marcus positioned themselves on either side of the ladder, weapons drawn. Ranger stood between them, his body tense and trembling. Footsteps above. The hatch creaked. A figure descended the ladder with the casual ease of someone who had made this journey hundreds of times. When his feet touched the ground and he turned to face the chamber, Owen felt the world collapse around him. To Harold Brennan, the man who had been Owen's family physician for 20 years, the doctor who had treated Margaret during her cancer battle, the respected medical professional who had received the Arrow Creek Humanitarian Award for his charitable work with children. "Harold," Owen's voice cracked, "what have you done?" Harold's expression remained calm, almost serene. His eyes surveyed the open chambers with mild annoyance, as if discovering that someone had rearranged his furniture. "Owen, I should have known your persistence would eventually lead you here." Marcus kept his weapon trained on the doctor, his hands steady despite the shock. But Ranger's reaction was far more visceral. The German shepherd cowered backward, his entire body shaking with terror. A high-pitched whine escaped his throat, the sound of an animal confronting its worst nightmare. His ears flattened completely, his tail tucked between his legs. Owen suddenly understood. The scar on Ranger's ear, the dog's fear upon entering this area, his recognition of a familiar scent. "You," Owen breathed. "Ranger was your dog." Harold smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. Yes, the dog. I acquired him as a puppy, hoping to train him properly. But he had this unfortunate trait of excessive loyalty, would not obey commands that conflicted with his moral compass. "Quite useless for my purposes." Marcus stepped protectively in front of Ranger. "You hurt him. You gave him that scar." A necessary lesson that he refused to learn. Owen advanced, his weapon unwavering. "Harold Brennan, you are under arrest for kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and attempted murder." Harold spread his hands, utterly unperturbed. "You'll understand eventually. Owen, all of you will—" These children were being saved. I kept them pure, protected them from the corruption of this world. You'll thank me one day." Owen handcuffed him with more force than necessary, his rage barely contained. Ranger, still trembling, positioned himself between Harold and the ladder, ensuring the man who had abandoned and abused him could not escape. Even in his terror, the dog remained loyal to justice. The convoy of emergency vehicles wound through the dark forest roads, their lights painting the trees in alternating red and blue. 3 ambulances carried 3 children toward Arrow Creek General Hospital, each young survivor accompanied by paramedics who monitored vital signs with careful attention. Behind them, a patrol car transported Harold Brennan to the county jail, his wrists secured in handcuffs, his expression still disturbingly calm. Owen rode in the ambulance with Lily, refusing to leave her side until she was safely in her parents' arms. The girl had fallen into an exhausted sleep, her breathing now steady and strong after receiving supplemental oxygen. Color had returned to her cheeks, replacing the terrifying blue pallor that had gripped her in the underground chamber. She looked peaceful, innocent, unaware of how close she had come to never waking again. At the hospital, chaos erupted in the most beautiful way possible. David and Sarah Parker burst through the emergency room doors before the ambulance had fully stopped. David's face was streaked with dried tears, his clothes disheveled from hours of desperate searching. Sarah still clutched the flyers she had been distributing, her hands refusing to release them even now. Behind them, young Ethan ran with legs that could barely keep pace with his parents. When the paramedics wheeled Lily through the doors, Sarah collapsed to her knees. A sound escaped her throat that was neither scream nor sob, but something primal, something that transcended language. David reached the gurney first, his hands shaking so violently that he could barely touch his daughter's face. "Daddy!" Lily's eyes opened, confused and weary. David could not speak. Words abandoned him entirely. He simply gathered his daughter into his arms and held her with the desperate strength of a man who had glimpsed the abyss of loss. His body shook with silent sobs as 15 hours of terror finally released their grip on his heart. Ethan pushed between the adults, his small face lighting up with pure joy. "Lily, Lily, you came back." He clutched his sister's hand and would not let go. Sarah wrapped her arms around all three of them, creating a circle of family that nothing could break. Tears flowed freely down every face, mixing together as foreheads touched and hearts reconnected. "Thank God," Sarah whispered repeatedly. "Thank God, thank God." But the reunions had only begun. An older couple rushed through the hospital doors minutes later, their faces masks of disbelief. Owen recognized them immediately, the Sullivans. He had sat in their living room 15 years ago, promising them he would find their son, Tommy. He had watched hope drain from their eyes over months of fruitless searching. He had attended the memorial service they held after 7 years, giving up hope that Tommy would ever return. Now their son lay in a hospital bed, alive and breathing. Mrs. Sullivan screamed when she saw him. The sound echoed through the corridor, raw and overwhelming. She ran to his bedside, touching his face with trembling fingers as if confirming he was real. Mr. Sullivan stood frozen for long moments, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes clearly saw. "Tommy," he finally whispered, "my boy." Tommy looked at them with confusion initially. His mind had been frozen at age 10, his body having aged in suspended animation while his consciousness remained dormant. The faces before him were familiar, yet different, older and more worn than the parents he remembered. "Dad," "Mom." His voice cracked with emotion and disorientation. The recognition in his eyes broke the final dam. The Sullivans embraced their son. 15 years of grief and anguish pouring out in that single moment of impossible joy. Emily Carter's reunion followed similar patterns of disbelief, transforming into overwhelming gratitude. Her parents, who had relocated to Portland after abandoning hope, drove through the night to reach Arrow Creek. When they arrived at dawn, their daughter was waiting, confused but alive. 3 families, shattered by loss over 15 years, now made whole again in a single night. Owen stood apart from the celebrations, watching from a quiet corner of the hospital corridor. His uniform was dirty. His hands still bore cuts from pounding against Lily's chamber, and exhaustion weighed heavily on every muscle. But something had lifted from his shoulders, a burden he had carried for so long that he had forgotten what lightness felt like. He walked to a window that overlooked the hospital parking lot. Dawn was breaking over Arrow Creek, painting the sky in the shades of gold and pink, and stars were fading as sunlight claimed dominance, pushing back the darkness that had reigned throughout this terrible night. Owen looked up at those fading stars and spoke softly. "I did it, Margaret. I found them. All of them, after all these years." He could almost hear her voice in response, warm and proud. The promise he had made on her deathbed, the vow that had driven him through years of self-doubt and professional frustration, was finally fulfilled. He had not given up on those children, and his persistence had been rewarded beyond any expectation. The cold case files would be closed, the families would heal, justice would be served, Margaret would be proud. Marcus approached with Ranger walking calmly beside him. The German Shepherd had been examined by veterinarians and cleared of any injuries. His trembling had stopped once Harold was secured in the patrol car. The monster from his past had been captured, and the dog seemed to understand that he was finally safe. Owen knelt down, bringing himself eye level with the ranger. The dog's amber eyes met his with calm intelligence. "You did this," Owen said softly. "You brought us here. You faced the man who hurt you, and you still completed your mission." Ranger's tail wagged gently. Marcus placed his hand on Owen's shoulder. He was abandoned because he was too loyal, too good, and that loyalty ended up catching the very person who threw him away. The irony was not lost on Owen. Harold had discarded Ranger for refusing to obey immoral commands. The dog's unbreakable moral compass and devotion to doing right had been seen as flaws, yet those exact qualities had led to Harold's capture. "We don't deserve dogs," Owen whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Ranger leaned forward and licked Owen's weathered cheek, a gesture of simple affection that spoke louder than any words. In that moment, Owen understood something profound about loyalty and love. True devotion did not waver when tested. It did not bend to convenience or break under pressure. It endured, patient and constant, even when the world proved cruel. Ranger had been betrayed by someone he trusted. Yet he had not become bitter or fearful. He had continued serving with his whole heart, saving lives and bringing justice. His capacity for unconditional love had not been diminished by the cruelty he had suffered. If a dog could maintain such purity of purpose despite being wounded, perhaps humans could learn to do the same. Owen stood slowly, his aging knees protesting. He looked through the window at the three families now gathered in the hospital cafeteria, sharing coffee and tears and embracing their returned children. Truth had finally emerged from 15 years of darkness. Love had conquered evil. Loyalty had triumphed over betrayal. And it had all happened because a German shepherd with a scarred ear refused to give up on a child he had never met. Autumn had returned to Arrow Creek, painting the forest in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. 1 full year had passed since that terrible night when Ranger had led Owen through the darkness to discover the mushroom house and the horrors hidden beneath. The leaves that had witnessed the search now carpeted the ground in new layers. Nature's quiet acknowledgment that time continued its endless march forward. The town square bustled with activity on this particular October morning. Residents gathered around a small stage that had been erected before the courthouse, their faces bright with anticipation. Banners stretched between lampposts, proclaiming in bold letters the purpose of the celebration. Children sat on their parents' shoulders for better views. Local news cameras positioned themselves for optimal angles. Owen stood at the back of the crowd, uncomfortable with the attention that this event would inevitably bring. He wore his dress uniform, the badges and decorations polished to mirror brightness. At his side, Ranger sat with perfect posture, his brown and black coat gleaming from a thorough grooming. The dog seemed to sense the importance of the occasion, maintaining a dignified stillness that impressed everyone who noticed. Mayor Thompson took the stage, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd through the speaker system. She spoke of heroism, of dedication, of the remarkable bond between humans and their canine partners. She recounted the events of that night, though most residents knew the story by heart at this point. It had become local legend, a tale that would be passed down through generations. Marcus Webb walked onto the stage when called, his dress uniform as crisp as Owen's. He carried a medal on a blue velvet cushion, the Canine Hero Award that the county reserved for exceptional acts of service. His eyes glistened with emotion that he did not try to hide. "Ranger," Marcus spoke into the microphone, his voice steady despite his feelings, "you came to me as a broken soul. Someone had hurt you, abandoned you, made you believe you were worthless. But you never let that darkness win. You became the finest game partner I have ever known." He descended from the stage and knelt before Ranger. The dog's tail wagged gently as Marcus fastened the medal around his neck. The crowd erupted in applause that echoed off the surrounding buildings. In the front row, 3 families sat together. The Parkers, the Sullivans, and the Carters had become inseparable since that night, bound by shared trauma and miraculous salvation. Lily Parker held up a drawing she had created specifically for this occasion. It depicted Ranger in heroic pose, surrounded by stars with the words, "My Hero," written in careful child's handwriting. After the ceremony concluded, Marcus approached Owen with serious purpose in his expression. The two men had developed a deep friendship over the past year, forged in the crucible of that underground bunker. "Sheriff," Marcus began, though Owen had officially retired 3 months prior, "Ranger is getting older. He deserves a peaceful retirement with someone who understands him, someone he trusts completely." Owen looked at the German shepherd, who gazed back with those intelligent amber eyes. The scar on his ear had faded slightly, but would always remain visible, a permanent reminder of the cruelty he had survived. "I would be honored," Owen replied, his voice thick. Marcus handed over the leash, and something profound passed between the 3 of them. 2 wounded souls, one human and one canine, had found each other at exactly the right moment in their lives. Owen drove Ranger to his home that afternoon. The house that had felt so empty since Margaret's death now welcomed its new resident with warmth. Owen had prepared a bed near the fireplace, food and water bowls in the kitchen, and toys scattered throughout the living room. Ranger explored each room carefully, his nose working constantly. When he had completed his investigation, he returned to Owen and sat directly in front of him, tail wagging with contentment. Each morning thereafter, Owen and Ranger walked through the Arrow Creek forest together. These were not searches for missing persons, but peaceful journeys of healing. They explored trails that Owen had never noticed during his decades of service, discovering hidden waterfalls and meadows filled with wildflowers. Owen found himself talking to Ranger during these walks, sharing memories of Margaret, reflecting on his career, processing the guilt that had plagued him for 15 years. Ranger listened with patient attention, offering no judgment, only companionship. David Parker eventually found new employment with an engineering firm in Seattle. His reputation restored and his family's finances stabilized. Sarah reduced her nursing shifts to spend more time with Lily and Ethan. Their home, once shadowed by financial stress and fear, now rang with laughter and normal family chaos. Lily returned to school and resumed her piano lessons, though she chose different routes for her bicycle rides. The nightmares that had plagued her initially faded with therapy and time. She drew constantly, perhaps, filling notebooks with images of dogs and forests and heroes in uniform. The 3 rescued families established the Rangers' Hope Foundation, dedicated to protecting children and supporting K-10 programs throughout Washington state. They raised funds through community events, with Harold Brennan's trial and conviction bringing national attention to their cause. Tommy and Emily required years of psychological treatment to adjust to their lost time. Their minds had been frozen at childhood while their bodies aged, but surrounded by loving families and professional support, they made steady progress. Harold Brennan received a life sentence without possibility of parole. His delusions of saving children through imprisonment were recognized as the dangerous madness they truly represented. Justice, though delayed, had been thoroughly served, and in a quiet house on the edge of Arrow Creek, an aging sheriff and a scarred German shepherd found peace together, their days filled with walks through forests that no longer held darkness, only the promise of tomorrow. Sometimes the greatest heroes walk on 4 legs and ask for nothing in return except our love. Ranger taught us that loyalty does not weaken when tested by betrayal, that hope does not die, even when buried in darkness for 15 years, and that family extends beyond blood to include every soul that stands beside us during our darkest hours. Owen found redemption not through grand gestures, but through quiet perseverance, proving that our failures do not define us when we refuse to surrender. The Parker family discovered that wealth matters little when hearts remain connected, and 3 children, stolen from their lives, reminded us that miracles still happen to those who believe. This story is not merely about a digger who tracked a missing child through the forest. It is about the unconditional love that exists between humans and animals, the unbreakable bonds of family, and the truth that goodness ultimately triumphs over evil. We all carry scars like Ranger, wounds from those who hurt us. Yet we can choose to remain loyal, to keep loving, to never stop hoping. Have you ever experienced a moment when an animal showed you what true loyalty means? What lesson has a pet taught you about unconditional love? Share your story in the comments below, and let us celebrate these four-legged angels together.